Hi guys, Sue. This is third part of What If Deku Had Returned by Death. So let's begin. 455 Chapter 21, It Will Be Fine. Anne, I know I said I would be updating my other FIC before this, but I didn't want to leave you with that cliffhanger for too long. Izuku crashed down on the roof much rougher than he would have liked, but when he angled his head upwards, he was greeted by the proud and blinding smile of All Might. Very impressive, young Midoriya. You really left your classmates in the dust. Surprised, Izuku bent his head over his shoulder to see the other students still struggling to catch up. Zero was the closest, but he still had about a quarter of the obstacle course left before the finish line. Ah, I didn't even notice, he muttered, and All Might laughed heartily. Then, before Zero could join them, the hero leaned in and spoke quietly. Come meet me in my office after this lesson ends. There's something important I need to talk to you about. Izuku froze. Important. His head filled with 1,000 different ideas of what that could mean, and none of them pleasant. But there was one thought that stood out more than the rest, a terrible, terrible thing that couldn't happen. It flooded his stomach with enough anxiety that Izuku wouldn't be surprised if it burst right open, like a balloon with too much air. For the rest of that day, all the way until Izuku entered All Might office, the sound of his feet hitting the floor rang through his head like a death knell. He was walking to his own execution, and all he wanted to do was to run away. His guts felt like they were crawling with bugs, and the only consolation was the mantra in his head promising him everything would be all right. It will be fine, it sounded, over and over again until he could almost believe it. His head pounded intact with his beating heart, and he watched helplessly as his hand pulled towards the door handle that would take him to his death. He felt possessed, his body moving all on its own, and he just wanted to scream, to pull away and just run and run until his legs gave out under him, never to return. But he didn't. The door clicked open. I can't die. To be honest, Izuku wasn't sure what kind of reaction he expected from that statement. Perhaps it was for Dr. Kyusai to give him a look that said he had lost his mind, but then again, such outlandish claims must be nothing new in her profession. Maybe he expected her to look at him with pity for the poor boy who can't tell fantasy from reality. And he wondered if any of her other patients had ever claimed to be immortal. And he wondered how many of those were speaking the truth. But whatever he might had been expecting, it didn't come. When he looked into Drive Kyusai's deep blue eyes, there was no pity, no sadness or confusion or whatever other emotion one could possibly expect. Her gaze was impressively neutral as she added something new to her little notebook, before putting it down in her lap and observing him with a face that never betrayed a thought. You can't die, she repeated, lacing her fingers together over lined sheets of paper. From the way she phrased her question, you would normally expect a tone of skepticism or condescension. But all he found was a quiet curiosity, asking him to elaborate. Stray thoughts from earlier was still crammed into his head, swirling through it at double speed like an icy blizzard, but he felt surprisingly calm as he mulled over his options. He knew that from now on, he was playing a careful game of truths and omissions. He needed to choose his words carefully, phrasing his sentences in a way that wouldn't set the doctor's alarm bells ringing. I can't die, he chanted. I can't die, because when I do, I just come back. But he couldn't tell her that. Never mind the fact she would think he was insane, she might deem him a danger to himself. Please, Uraraka's voice echoed in his head, voice cracking at the last octave as she pleaded for his sake. But I can't lie either. He needed to thread carefully. One misplaced word could mean a trip to the psych ward. He couldn't let that happen, he refused to let that happen. Gods knew his friends worried about him enough as it was. But he filled his lungs with a mouthful of air, feeling his heart rate slow, until all he knew was still placidity. It would be fine, he would be fine, because even if he messed up, even if he said the wrong thing, even if, he would always have his fail-safe. He just had to keep trying, until he got it just right. There was nothing he couldn't fix. It's my quirk, he began. It was an oddly neutral statement, but one that also opened a whole new can of questions simultaneously. He knew what his official quirk registration papers said, but he didn't know if his therapist had access to it as well. Still, admitting that he possessed two quirks rather than coming up with some amazing lie as to how he obtained the magical power of immortality, the choice was obvious. Besides, it wasn't like she could force any information about one for all out of him. It will be fine, it prevents me from dying. Or rather, it won't let me stay dead. It was a risky move on his part, to admit that he had, in fact, died at least once before. But it wasn't incriminating enough to force Drive Kyusai to breach his right of confidentiality. No one knows about this power aside from me, and I'm not planning on telling anyone either. Kyusai hummed, tapping a long nail against the side of her mechanical pencil. I can understand why you would want to keep something like that to yourself, she hummed, before her impassive expression took on a more serious note. It can't have been a pleasant experience when you first discovered it. Your survival was left to a game of luck, and if not for your quirk you would have been dead right now. It must be frightening. It is, Izuku nodded. He leaned in closer to the doctor, his voice dropping a few decibels as if he was afraid someone might overhear. Every time I die I wonder, is this the end? I don't know if there's a limit to how many times my quirk work, or if there are any conditions I need to meet to activate it that I don't know about, but have been lucky to fulfill thus far. Yet, before I even have time to finish my thought, I'm back. But you know what is the most frightening of it all? Doctor. Kyusai said nothing, waiting for him to give the answer to his own question. It's not knowing if this will ever end. If I will continue to live like this forever, because my quirk won't let me die. Izuku belatedly realized that every part of his body had broken out in violent trembles, and the only air that could enter his lungs were from the quick, gasping breaths he so desperately took. He felt so calm earlier, he never even noticed how worked up he'd became. And yet, he couldn't find it in himself to regret his words. It felt good, finally allowing his feelings and thoughts spill free without needing to spare a thought to how this would affect the people around him. The woman observing him had moved from tapping her pencil to the block of lined paper resting under her palms, and she asked, "Do you want to die?" Now that was a loaded question, wasn't it? But Izuku spent a surprisingly little amount of time to come up with the answer. Because as confusing as his never-ending hurricane of mixing emotions and conflicting thoughts could be, it was clear as day. No, and it was the truth. No matter the dark, miserable places his thoughts so often found themselves in, no matter the pain and fear and anger that was forced into his brain, he knew. Even if there was times when he just wanted to stop existing altogether, he knew. Because the thought of dying was terrifying. To think of that 1 second of darkness that always preceded any of his resets sent frozen spikes of all-consuming fear through his spine, impaling his heart and lungs and spreading throughout his body like cold tendrils of pure dread. For all he acted like it didn't matter anymore, he didn't want to die. Perhaps if you asked him the same question a few months earlier, the answer might have been yes. But not now, not when he'd met such fantastic people, people that believed in him, people who wanted him around. And not now, when he'd seen those same people die, for no reason other than to satisfy some sick fucker and his twisted ideals. He caught a glimpse of Dr. Kyusai scratching something down in her notebook as he snapped back into reality. Finishing up with a flick of her wrist, her free hand landed on the round tabletop separating the two, palm up and waiting. Izuku was confused for all but 1 second, before she explained. My quirk is called empathy. It contains 2 components. The first being that I emit a constant aura of receptivity, which you may or may not have noticed. I'm unable to turn it off, but it's useful for making my patients comfortable and allows them to open up more easily. The second component is a bit more invasive, which is why I will ask for your permission before I use it. If I touch someone and focus, I can feel their emotions as if they were my own. I can't read your mind, and you won't notice a thing. But it will help me gain a deeper understanding of your feelings, and I have found it very useful for aiding patients in the past. Some emotions just cannot be put into words, but if you'd let me, you won't have to try. Izuku's fingers twitched out of habit, and he was overcome with a strong desire to write down everything she just told him. Feeling somewhat uncertain, he asked, so how does it work exactly? You just feel what I do right now. Try to think of all the things that bothers you. When you're ready, place your hand in mine. If that makes you uncomfortable, I could touch your arm or head instead. I know some patients prefer that. So long as skin contact is made, no matter how little, my quirk can be activated. Ah, no, that's all right, Izuku waved his arms dismissively. Then, he considered what she just told him. Think of what bothers him. That's a very broad category. There's so many things, and not all of which stems from his quirk. Old memories from his days before he entered UA emerged unbidden, with burning words and fists and a quirk specialist telling his mother that her son was probably quirkless. And if he wasn't, he might as well be. A leap of faith, but that's not why he was here. Those were old problems for another day, it could wait. It will be fine, he thought of UA's entrance exam. It was the first time he'd ever seen another person die, but it was so long ago now, he couldn't even remember what it felt like. He thought of the USJ, and how he thought it would never end. Just an endless cycle of death and tears, for the rest of eternity. He thought of Stain, of the anger that took form inside of him like an uncontrollable creature, its ugly black silhouette suspiciously similar to that of the winged Numu he'd threatened to mutilate. And he thought of Uraraka, of Iida, of All Might, and even of Todoroki. One by one, his classmates and teachers scrolled across his retinas, before coming to a stop at the last person. She stared at him with big, tearful eyes and sobbed. Izuku. And oh, how many times had he heard his mom cry like that? As years passed, the word began to lose its meaning, until it was more of a sob than a proper name. Just hearing it once had been one time too much, and he would do anything he possibly could to never hear it again. All these thoughts, all the things he had felt since he realized his hidden power, he summoned to the front of his mind. With a newfound determination, he put his hand in Dr. Kyusai's, nodding in confirmation. "I'm ready." She returned his gesture, and her eyes slipped closed as her facial muscles scrunched up in a look of deep concentration. But not even a second passed, before she pulled her hand away as if burnt. A hiss slipped through her teeth, and for the one instant their eyes met, Izuku saw a cold, deep horror reflecting of the dark blue of her irises. The next second it was gone, disappearing just as quickly as it came. Her face quickly schooled into a professional expression of indifference, while her hand returned to her lap as she straightened her back in some attempt of forced composure. I think I understand now." The doctor took a deep breath, and Izuku let his eyes travel down to land on the white-knuckled grip of her mess of tangled fingers, curling around each other much too tight to look comfortable. They were shaking. "It's a good thing you're here, and it was very brave of you to allow me a glimpse of your emotions. I'm not going to mince words, there are a lot of things we need to work on. And while I have a feeling you may not believe me, Midoriya-san," she paused, and slowly, her fingers begun to relax. "You're not beyond hope. And I promise, you aren't going to feel like this forever." Izuku didn't want to believe his trust had been betrayed, but, in all of that, did he make a mistake? Was it something he said, or something she felt? Should he have reset after all? Was it still too late? Young Midoriya. Izuku jumped when he heard the familiar voice calling for him. And there he was, the skeleton form of All Might waiting for him in all his glory. His executioner. And there was no more time for speculation or theorizing, because whatever came, came. All Might, he returned as he made for an empty chair, dragging every step out for as long as possible, eyes glued to the hero already seated in front of him. Too soon, he reached his destination, his teacher leisurely crossing his long fingers over each other, one after the other. A heavy atmosphere fell over the room, and pinpricks of sweat dampened the back of Izuku's neck as he awaited his verdict. And then, just as he thought he was going to go insane from anticipation, All Might spoke. "It's time I told you about All for One." 455 Chapter 22, Declaration. And I totally recommend listening to the Far Cry 3 OST while reading this story, because it goes really well. In fact, I was listening to it a bunch while writing. Also, I would like to thank everyone who answered my question last time. Smiley face. I know I can be overly critical of myself, so I thought it was just best to ask what you guys think. I'm glad to see that you either seem to think the quality has stayed consistent, or even better. Don't be afraid to tell me if it ever changes though. Maybe wait if it's just one chapter though, because it might just be that one chapter that sucks. Cheeky smiley face. Izuku stared into All Might's eyes, and realized something important. Something no one could understand but him. This man, this evil, "I'm sure you two will have to fight him one day," All Might had said, something akin to shame and regret in his eyes. It's what it means to be a wielder of One for All. Its true purpose, to defeat the greatest evil of mankind. All Might chose him. The strongest hero put his faith in a quirkless boy, because he believed in him. And Izuku realized then, that out the billions of people on Earth, there was no better choice. No one a more perfect vessel to wield One for All and defeat the greatest villain to exist, than him. Every hero and heroine that had come before him had failed, but Izuku knew, with a 100% certainty, that All for One would end with him. Because Midoriya Izuku couldn't fail. Because Midoriya Izuku couldn't die. The end of the term test was approaching, and the fact that it had only been 3 months since Izuku entered the gates of UA, donning his school uniform for the first time, hit him like a sack of bricks. It felt like a lifetime ago now. Actually, make that several. The Midoriya Izuku from back then was little more than a fading memory by this point, and the first 14 years of his life was like viewing a video filmed with a camera out of focus, only consisting of featureless and blurry swaths of color. They might as well belong to someone else. Only key parts of his childhood could still be made out clearly, and most of them, he'd rather not remember at all. Mustering up energy to study was a challenge. Homework seemed much less important when you've watched yourself and everyone around you die 100 times over, but Izuku didn't want his quirk to affect his life any more than it already had. Let's not add a failed written exam to the top of my problems. There was a practical part as well, but he didn't have enough information about it to worry about it properly. He just had to handle it as it came, like with so many things these days it seemed. He had been mumbling to himself, but grew quiet when he heard his name called. It was in a sneering tone that was all too familiar to him, and the screeching noise of chair legs scraping against the floor stung his eardrums as Uraraka and Iida rose from their seats as one, looking at Bakugo like vipers, ready to strike at a moment's notice. Kacchan was glaring at Izuku, but made no move to approach. And the blonde boy must have been talking about something, but Izuku had been too wrapped up in his thoughts to catch any of it. Thankfully, it didn't look like the hot-blooded teen expected an answer, as he opened his mouth once more and spoke, loud enough for anyone to hear. "I dunno what the fuck is wrong with you," he began, red eyes boring into Izuku as if he was trying to solve a very frustrating puzzle, and failing to boot. "You've been acting even creepier than usual, but it doesn't matter. You're still an annoying shitrag, and you always will be. No matter what weird shit you've been up to, I'm still gonna beat your score into the fucking ground on the end-term exam. You hear that?" He flung an accusing finger toward Todoroki, who had been observing the exchange in silence up to this point. "You too, asshole, both of you are fucking dead." And with that declaration, he stomped out of the classroom, kicking chairs and desks along the way. Iida and Uraraka watched like hawks, all the way until Kacchan slammed the door shut behind him with a bang, and they relaxed. "Oh man, I feel like I haven't seen that Bakugo for a while," Kirishima commented, rubbing the back of his skull and looking uncomfortable. "Really?" Izuku wondered, looking curiously to the classroom exit. "Seems like the usual Kacchan to me." He paused for a second, thinking. Then, in a moment of liberating boldness, proclaimed, "He's wrong though. Because I'm gonna beat him." 455 Chapter 23, End of Term. And I was so excited after last chapter, that I finished the next one and wrote a good portion of the one after that. I was gonna publish this yesterday, but I felt kinda shitty and was too tired to proofread and edit it. But now it's here. Yay! Laughing face. Midoriya Izuku would curse the gods, but he already knew the world hated him. Kacchan glared at him, like he was wont to do, and Izuku couldn't help the exasperated, "Really?" that left his mouth. Kacchan's glare deepened. "Yes, really," Aizawa affirmed with a deep suffering sigh. "For the practical exam, the two of you will be paired together as a team. And as for your opponent, that would be me." A loud voice boomed, and Izuku didn't even need to look to know who it belonged to. Because really, there was probably no person on Earth, or at least Japan, who didn't recognize that voice. Again, he repeated, "Really?" All Might laughed, but Izuku didn't find the situation very amusing. He glanced toward Kacchan, and he could already see the disaster coming a mile away. But arguing with his teachers would do him little good, so like with everything else, he just had to accept it. Besides, there were far more precious things he could spend his time and attention on. Whatever, the tired boy shrugged. "Let's just get this over with." Kacchan knocked his shoulder into his. "That's my line, shitbag." Right, Izuku thought, as if Kacchan would cooperate so easily. Fight or flight, run or stay. Those were the two choices left before them, and knowing Kacchan, he would most likely only leave Izuku with one viable option. If they stayed, they would have to fight All Might. But even with the heavyweights the hero had strapped onto his form to give his students a smidgen of a chance, there was no way they could win, if only for the simple reason that Kacchan wouldn't let them. Because the first thing he would do once the test started would be to run off on his own, ignoring Izuku completely. Because Kacchan doesn't need help. Because Kacchan can do everything by himself. Because only weaklings have to rely on other people. How petulant. Maybe together, with a well-thought-out plan and perfect execution, they could do it. They're both smart people, and certainly not weak by any means. Of course, the likelihood of Kacchan listening to a word he said was close to zero. Which only left running. But, if Izuku is one thing, it's stubborn. He wouldn't give up without even trying. Cock. Shut it, Kachan kept on walking, not even once looking in Izuku's direction, and fuck off. I don't need you around to weigh me down. You think you can take on All Might by yourself? Izuku raised an eyebrow, because honestly, even Kachan must realize how ridiculous that sounds. I'll keep dodging his attacks until he gets tired, or not, and then, I'll knock him the fuck out the second his guard is down. Izuku blinked, because that was truly one of the stupidest things he had ever heard. Kachan was smarter than this, Izuku knew he was. But it seemed like just the mere presence of Deku was enough to blind his bully to everything that wasn't showing off how much stronger and better he was compared to him. Kachan, Izuku said, are you an idiot? He felt the fist coming before he saw it. The air shifted, and his back pitched backwards on its own, but he wasn't quite fast enough. He avoided the worst of the damage, but the tip of his chin still got clipped painfully, and he hissed on reflex. Before he could lose his balance and fall on his ass, he spun on his heel while his other foot shot out and moved at blinding speed. It cut effortlessly through the air in an arc, only slowing when it impacted with something soft and human, but Izuku wasn't done yet. The momentum continued to carry him forwards, pulling the weight on the dorsum of his foot with him, all the way until it slammed down into the ground. Kachan's head bounced off the hard surface of the floor, and Izuku screamed. What the hell is wrong with you? Kachan took a few seconds to recuperate, but Izuku wasn't going to give him a chance to retaliate. He put a foot to the blonde's chest and held him there, hard emerald eyes staring him down. Get the fuck off of me. The blonde screamed, letting an explosion off against Izuku's ankle. It hurt, enough to make anyone flinch, but Izuku was too pissed to give Kachan that kind of satisfaction. Instead, he just continued to stare, never letting his eyes leave his target. Is this it? Is this really how you plan to live out the rest of your life? He spoke, as calm and chilly as ice. You think you can just punch your way out of every problem, is that it? Of course you do. No one's ever showed you otherwise, have they? Izuku leaned in, eyes aglow with an uncanny callousness. But let me tell you a secret. Out there, in the real world, if you continue the way you are right now, you'll be dead in dirt before you know it. Wanna know why? Kachan didn't make a sound. Because you're never going to ask anyone for help. You'd rather die, and that's exactly what's going to happen. Izuku finally retrieved his foot, letting the explosive boy free. But sure, if that's what you want, go ahead. Go die. After all, no one's gonna save you. He didn't mean that. Izuku knew that despite how much Kachan hurt him, he'd still be there. Even if Kachan screamed at him to leave and go away, even if Kachan blew off his limbs one by one, he'd still be there. Because Midoriya Izuku didn't know how to stop caring, but God, he wished he could. Caring only got you hurt, especially when the person you cared about couldn't give less of a shit about what happened to you. When that person tell you to kill yourself, and abuse you with words and fists until you wonder if maybe, he's right. Izuku would die for Kachan. But that didn't mean he didn't take sick satisfaction in the shocked expression directed at him, because God, it was just so perfect. The white of Kachan's eyes on perfect display, shrunken pupils that couldn't look away, a mouth that had lost its permanent scowl in favor of the slight gape that showed off those perfect white teeth. It filled Izuku with a sort of giddiness he hadn't felt in a long time, and it took his all to hide the grin that just begged to spring free. Serves him right, he thought, head alight with a heady intoxication of pure adrenaline. Let's see how you feel, to be on the receiving end for once. Izuku cared, all too much, he cared. With all his soul and being, so much that it was eating him alive, he cared. But let Kachan believe he didn't. Kachan's mouth moved. Quietly, almost like he was afraid, he spoke. What's wrong with you? Then, his words were drowned out in a sea of noise and smoke. Izuku's feet lifted of the ground, and he and Kachan flew through the air like lifeless dolls as wind carried them far and fast, slamming them down and into the ground as gravity did its work. Brace yourselves and pray, a deafeningly loud voice thundered across the battlefield, for I am here. 455 Chapter 24, Determination. And, y'all ready for this? Degree. Everything happened so fast, Izuku barely had time to register it. As soon as they hit the ground, Kachan was already on the offensive. His attention honed in on All Might, and with a feint and a surprise attack, it almost looked like he could make it. He didn't. Before either boy could blink, All Might had already countered the attack, and Kachan was back on the ground. Izuku had no doubt who would be next, when All Might ominously and deliberately turned his powerful body in his direction. Are you going to fight? He smiled, but there was no kindness behind it. Or will you abandon your friend and run? It was tempting, so fucking tempting to just bolt and leave Kachan with this mess he was so keen to get himself into. And it wasn't like all those other times. He could run, and Kachan would be fine. Perhaps a few bruises, some broken bones at most, but he would be fine. Because All Might was no real villain, as much as he tried to play the part. Because Izuku had seen what real villains do, and it's a kind of evil no one who didn't truly mean it could emulate. But, in the end, the instincts which had been so painfully beaten into him with each additional reset he had to endure won out. He could run, but if the only way Izuku could win this was by leaving someone behind, he didn't want to. Don't misunderstand, it wasn't that he felt some kind of obligation toward Kachan to stay. Rather, with the loud-mouthed blonde by his side or not, Izuku had already made his decision. Because he knew that sooner or later, he would have to face a foe stronger than a weakened All Might playing pretend bad guy. And unlike his teacher, they weren't going to hold back. And they sure as hell wouldn't show any mercy. So, he stayed. Even if it meant he would fail the exam, he stayed. For there were worse things out there than a bad grade and his idol's disappointment. As if, he bit out scornfully, the power of One for All lighting up the dusty battlefield with hues of bright green. Charging All Might head-on was out of the question. Kachan tried, and despite his rather admittedly clever tactic, All Might had countered it with minimal effort. If Izuku wanted to win, he needed to be smart. Smarter than Kachan, and smarter than All Might. For the moment, he dashed backwards, just as Kachan flew over his head with a series of explosions launching him forward, like a malfunctioning rocket ship. And this, despite Kachan's best intentions, left Izuku with the opportunity too perfect. He'd be damned if he missed it. Not unexpected, All Might made quick work of the explosive user's frontal assault. The blonde had attempted another feint, before thrusting a hand downwards and with a boom, launched himself into the air in an attempt to catch the pretend villain in the back. It reminded Izuku of their first battle trial, when Izuku had played the hero and Kachan the villain, except this time, it wasn't as successful. Because All Might was the #1 hero, not just some Deku. All Might ducked the explosion that flew overhead, singing a few of his golden blonde strands, before grabbing a hold of the attacking teen's wrist and flung him to the side like dirty laundry. When his attention turned back to Izuku, the boy was nowhere to be found. Did the little hero run after all? He questioned out loud, scratching his chin. That doesn't seem right. His head snapped to the right, smashing the huge slab of concrete coming his way just in time before it could cause any damage. Smart, but you're going to have to try better than that, my boy. All Might didn't have time to finish his sentence, because before the hero villain even opened his lips, Izuku was already putting his next move into action. Too distracted by the flying piece of cement, All Might didn't realize that by the time the projectile had been launched, Izuku had already left his position long ago. Behind you, he thought, fighting the nagging urge to say it out loud. Announcing your sneak attacks was something that only happened in movies, for no one would be so idiotic as to ruin the surprise of catching their opponent off guard just so they could look cool. Not daring to hold back, he drove his fist into All Might's right side as hard as he could without breaking his bones in the process. For a brief moment, he'd considered aiming for his weak spot, but that move was only useful because Izuku knew about it beforehand. Fighting a real villain, it was doubtful he'd have that kind of information. There's no point if I can't use it in a real fight. All Might dashed off to safety, mitigating the worst of the damage. I'll give you that one, he coughed lightly, wiping the corner of his mouth. But the same move won't work twice. You're going to have to come up with something new if you want to get me a second time. Easier said than done. The only reason this move even worked in the first place was because Kachan inadvertently gave him the opportunity. But if he could use Kachan's recklessness to his advantage once, then maybe. Out of my way, Deku. Izuku had less than a second to dive out of harm's way, before Kachan tore past him in a trail of flickering lights. He squinted his forest green eyes as the brightness burned his retinas, and he almost missed the way Kachan dodged All Might's grabbing hands narrowly, by firing off a blast to his left and letting the momentum carry him to safety. His feet hit the ground, and a black boot kicked up a cloud of sand and dust into his opponent's face. He didn't waste any time retrieving his leg from the air, but instead moved his hands behind him and set both of them off at the same time. His other foot came up to join the first, and he delivered an explosive aided dropkick to All Might's face. The fake villain moved to grab his ankles, but Kachan swung his arms from behind his back to aim them downwards, and still balancing atop All Might's face, set off 2 big blasts in his direction, stunning the symbol of peace temporarily. Kacchan smiled victoriously and jumped off his teacher, ready to set off his quirk once again aimed from behind. His victory was short-lived however, because quick as lightning, All Might spun on his heel, and landed a devastating blow straight into his abdomen. The explosive teen hacked up the contents of his stomach, and before he could recover, All Might sent a burst of wind his way, carrying the teen until he smacked shoulders first into a half-crumbled building. That's not gonna work, All Might grinned, and before Izuku had time to react, the flat of his teacher's palm cut through the air in a backwards moving arc, sending waves of wind pressure along the way, continuing until it met with Izuku and sent him off. You two sure like trying to attack me from behind, don't you? How unheroic. And you sure don't waste any time either. I almost didn't catch you in time, Midoriya my boy. Shit, Izuku cursed. He had tried to use Kacchan's assault to his advantage to sneak in an attack on All Might whilst he was distracted, but after so many hits and attempted hits from behind, the hero was on high alert. I need him to lower his guard again, he realized. Or else, I'm never gonna get another chance. Izuku wheezed as all air left his lungs at once, because suddenly, Kacchan was on him. He'd driven his form into the other boy's side, and he shouted, I told you to piss off, Deku. Is he for real? Izuku thought in disbelief. That whole conversation, and he still haven't learned anything. Izuku wasn't just going to let the blonde punch him around as he pleased. The back of his hand slapped hard across Kacchan's cheek, and in anger, returned, why don't you piss off? So far, all I'm seeing you doing is letting All Might smack you around like you're his personal punching bag. Which, okay, that might have been too far. It wasn't even true, not really, and Izuku had taken his share of blows as well. He was just so angry, he couldn't stop himself from returning every Spitfire word thrown in his face right back. So, he hit him right where he knew it would hurt. This is what it must feel like to be Kacchan. He didn't like it, but it was also liberating, in a cruel and selfish sort of way. But it was a satisfaction that only lasted temporarily, and as addicting as it was, he knew he would come to regret it later. You're fighting the wrong opponent. All Might didn't give them any further warning, before another push of air blasted them away. This sucks, Izuku thought as he awaited his painful descent. It's not fair at all. But since when had Izuku's life ever been fair? When the two students crashed into the rocky rubble of the ruined city, Izuku knew what he had to do. It pissed him off, but if he wanted to win this, there was no other way. And for once, just once, he really wanted to win. Without an iota of doubt about his victory, he wanted to win. Before either of them could fully recover, Izuku's hand was already clutching Kacchan tight in his grip. He ran, not to flee, but he needed some time to think. He stopped, panting hard, hiding behind a building that balanced on its foundation precariously. He dropped the struggling blonde by his feet, and breathing heavily, said, Kacchan, please, for once, can we just work together? Kacchan glared, but it wasn't quite his usual burning stare. Something seemed different about it, hesitant almost. Izuku continued, you won't ever have to talk to me again after this. But don't you want to win? Don't you want to win against All Might? He grinned, big and wide, not just something small, but absolute, obliterating victory. His fist clenched tight, and his eyes was filled with white-hot determination. I don't care what you have me do. Just tell me, and I'll fucking do it. I want to win. Christ, Deku, Kacchan looked at him like he didn't know who he was. I knew something was going on with you, but seriously, what the fuck? Since when did you want to obliterate All Might? Since I decided that if I'm able to do that, then I might stand a chance. If possible, Kacchan looked even more confused. A chance? A chance against what? What the hell are you planning? Izuku looked thoughtful for a second. Then, to survive. 455 Chapter 25, Demolition Synergy. Holy shit, I'm alive. Bet you weren't expecting that. TBH, I'm not sure I was either. Sorry that it took so long. I was just so excited to get to this chapter, and then it didn't turn the way I had envisioned and I kinda lost motivation. Sad face. Well, it's out now. Let's see how long I can keep going. This is fucking crazy, Kacchan muttered, but the sharp grin on his face was telling. This is fucking crazy. So, you're actually going along with it? Izuku knew the question ran the risk of pissing the other teen off, but he never expected Kacchan to look so excited. The fucking expression on his face is going to be priceless, he said, and Izuku wasn't sure if it was an answer to the question or the blonde just thinking aloud and ignoring him completely. Kachan nodded his messy hair of spikes silently, as if already imagining it. Which, knowing him, he probably was. Just don't fuck this up, because I sure as hell ain't gonna carry you out of there. So long we get All Might, it's fine, Izuku assured. Then you can just run for the exit. Kachan looked at him, as if offended. Always the same self-sacrificing asshole, he sneered, and Izuku realized his mistake. Quickly, before he had the time to work himself into a rage, Izuku corrected himself. Meeting the crimson gaze glaring daggers into him, he answered in a tone with unwavering resolve laced around every letter. I'm not gonna fail, Kachan. That's what I fucking thought, he answered with a nod. Now come on, let's fucking destroy him. All Might scratched his chin, eyes scanning the concrete rubbles and crumbling buildings that made up the destroyed landscape around him. Now where could those two be hiding? One ear perking up, he gyrated his broad body to greet approaching footsteps. Ah, Midoriya, my boy. He welcomed, before tilting his head to the side and cupping his chin thoughtfully. Now let's see, where is that angry friend of yours? Not here, Izuku replied, not missing a beat. His lips were pressed tight together in a thin line of displeasure, and he eyed his teacher cautiously. You know, pairing the two of us together was really cruel, All Might. His name was uttered like a dirty word, and All Might forced a strained chuckle, eyes flickering nervously from the boy in front of him to the many jagged piles of debris scattering the destroyed battlegrounds. Not my idea, young man. But you know, a professional hero must have the ability to adapt to any situation, even unsavory teammates. Oh, so I'm the one that needs to adapt. Izuku walked with leisurely steps toward the not villain, gravel crunching under his heel with every meticulous step. He paused by a wrinkled guard railing, which despite all the abuse it had endured, was still valiantly fighting to stand in the cracked concrete ground, as everything else fell apart around it. Izuku ran his gloved fingers over it carefully, feeling it shift precariously beneath them. That's funny, I'm not the one who attacked his ally when things didn't go my way. Ah, but I did fight back. Was that wrong of me? Am I not allowed to defend myself? Should I have just let him keep punching me until he was satisfied? Izuku smiled sardonically, hand closing around the metal bar resting between his fingers. All Might coughed into his fist awkwardly. Now, that's not what he started, before cutting himself off when he realized he didn't know how to proceed. What I mean is, what I'm trying to say. The hero's teeth clamped painfully over the tip of his tongue in surprise when a deafeningly loud explosion rang out behind him. Instantly, his head whipped backwards hard enough to give him whiplash, but Izuku forced the attention back on him with a loud shout and a gust of wind. Don't turn your back on me, All Might. It was just in time that his teacher managed to concentrate his focus back on his student, and his reflexes forced his arms up to shield him from the worst of the damage, while his heels dug deeply into the ground to dampen the effect of the windy assault. Izuku's teeth bit down on the inside of his cheek, and he flinched in pain as his finger turned a mottled purple, skin and muscle swelling unevenly around the broken bone. KH, he held back the urge to curse, focusing instead on his next course of action. He couldn't waste any time, he needed to move, now. Another explosion, and Izuku ripped out the barely standing railing, which was still being held tight in his grip, before charging his opponent with soulful determination. Despite himself, All Might's attention had been stolen away from Izuku a second time that day, and his blue gaze was searching for a loud-mouthed blonde he was sure to find hiding somewhere between the jagged edges of ruined houses. Izuku grinned, almost manic from all the adrenaline pumping through his veins. With uncontained excitement, he whispered, I warned you, All Might, before wrapping steel bars around the muscular arms and torso of his hero, creating a makeshift prison, and caging the symbol of peace inside. But, just as easily as Izuku folded the fence to his will, as easily would it be for All Might to break free. Despite that, the short amount of time Izuku would buy from All Might attempting to break away from his grasp was their only hope. Every tiny little second counted. It just had to be enough. Because that was all he needed. A second, just a second, once he let go. But for now, he needed a few more. So, he holds on. With all the strength he could muster, he squeezes the person in his arms as hard as he possibly could. With his legs, his arms, his whole body, he holds on to the golden hero for dear life. Just a little longer, he could feel his bones creaking and muscles stretch, far enough that he swore he could the tiny fibers in them tearing as All Might continued to struggle. Just a little longer, a final blast of fire and smoke, and finally, it's falling. Kachan had done it. Izuku watched in awe and fear, eyes wide and mouth agape as the giant skyscraper broke in two. Almost as if in slow motion, it began to fall, and Izuku found himself frozen by the sight. It was pure destruction, glass and stone alike breaking apart and soaring through the air in a hail of debris, with the giant shadow of the remaining building just beneath, blocking out the sun and highlighting the carnage. Izuku couldn't hold on any longer. It was time to let go. His fingers unclasped from skin-tight spandex, limbs relaxing and crying with pain and relief all at once as he dropped to the ground. As soon as he felt the first contact of his heavy boots touching the floor, he dug his heels in and let his legs fall into a squat, before springing like a coil. His dark green curls lashed against his cheeks as he thrusted backwards, and in morbid amazement, he watched as pieces of heavy concrete, both tiny and small, crashed like meteors in a shower of rubble. When they hit the ground, it kicked up both dust and shrapnel, which surrounded All Might and hid the hero in a sandy cloak. Izuku had to squint hard as tears sprung into the corners of his eyes, doing their best to ease the burning irritation caused by the polluted air. It worked, he realized, the thought moving sluggishly in a dense pool of disbelief. But when it finally reached him, the awe and incredulously washed away to uncover a hiccuping laugh that made his chest feel like it was filled with soda, bubbling with amazement. Because finally, there was a chance. The mad plan he and Kachan had struggled together with actually worked. They might actually beat All Might. As soon as his body hit the ground, he ran. With all the strength his legs could carry, he ran, never once daring to look back. He didn't know if the shattered building had pulled the hero down with it, trapping him beneath the rubble. He didn't know if All Might had already managed to dig himself free. A pit in his stomach, like vacuum inhaling everything around it, made him hollow with the worry that, maybe this was too far. Were they making a mistake? It was a concern he didn't want to feed, because this was All Might. Of course he'll be fine. Was he really so conceited as to think he could seriously harm the #1 hero? And more than that, it was the nervous flutter in his limbs that licked his flesh in warm, pleasant tickles that didn't want to consider how dangerous this plan might actually be. Because it was the only thing he could think of. It was the only thing that might give them a chance. In the corner of his eyes, he saw a flash of blonde as Kachan joined him by his side. A crazy grin cracked across his face, and he cackled in delight. Holy shit, he swore, eyes meeting Izuku's. Did you see that shit? It was a rhetorical question of course, so Izuku settled to answer it with a wide smile of his own. For one moment, whatever past they might have didn't matter, as they shared in each other's success, laughing in victorious glee. The laughter stopped as Kachan suddenly pulled to a stop, and whipping his head back, he cursed. Fuck. Izuku joined him in halted movements, gaze joining the blondes and grimacing at the sight of All Might speeding toward them. His imposing form was covered in bleeding scrapes and bruises, his costume torn in several places and just the tiniest hint of a limp left leg. His smile was strained, clashing sharply with the bright anticipation lighting up the vivid blue of his eyes. He was watching his students with acute focus, growing ever larger the more he closed in on them. Get behind me, Kachan shouted brashly, bringing his hands up in front of him and squaring his stance. Izuku followed without a word, knowing better than to ask questions. I'm gonna give this fucker an explosion big enough that he won't have a choice but to dodge. He grinned, narrow pupils fixated on the rapidly approaching form of their opponent. When I tell you to, pull the pins of both of my gauntlets. You got that, you overly obsessed fanboy. Got it, Izuku acknowledged, brushing off the insult and maneuvered his arms under Kachan's, preparing the grenade-like gloves the same way he'd seen the other do so many times. His fingers curled around the metal loops, cold against his sweaty skin, and ready to pull at any moment. All Might's eyes increased in size, seemingly having caught on to their plan, but it was too late. Now, Kachan screamed, and Izuku's senses quite literally exploded in a mix of heat, noise and blinding light as both Kachan's hands went off at once, which joined the gauntlets in creating a massive blaze made out of pure glory and destruction, consuming all in its path. The power was enough to bring both students down with it, forcing their feet off of the ground and up into the air. But Izuku, having taught himself to never let a bad situation go to waste, seized the opportunity. The exit was at their backs, but even with the force of the explosion, it would not be enough to carry them to victory. So, he gritted his teeth, and while he could still feel his toes touching the ground, pushed off as hard as he could. With the power of One for All and the burning backlash of Kachan's quirk, they were sailing toward the exit at a dangerous speed. Wrapping his arms ever tighter around his partner's torso, all Izuku could do was pray, please let this be enough. Fuck, Kacchan choked as Izuku's limbs dug into his torso, and he probably would have turned his head to glare at him if he could. Give me a fucking warning next time before you pull some shit like that, would you? No time, Izuku dismissed, squinting through blonde strands. He'd lost feeling in the lower half of his feet, but it was easy to ignore with the adrenaline fueling his mind and body. Can you see him? Did you get him? Of course I got him, Kacchan replied with a huff, but his eyes surveyed the horizon intently for a telltale flash of golden blonde or electric blue. It was hard to see anything through the hair lashing across their faces and the black smoke still floating like a thick curtain over the fake city, but their senses were set on high alert for the first sign of trouble. Izuku looked behind him, and saw the hard ground approaching rapidly. Time to land, he warned, bracing his legs. After that, it was only a few more meters to the exit, and they would be home free. Assuming he didn't break his legs before then, that is. His soul slammed into the unforgiving asphalt, sending shocks of pain rocking throughout his bones. The smell of burnt rubber entered his nose as his feet skid along the ground, and he locked his teeth together in a pained grimace as he fought against gravity's best attempts to topple them over like pink domino pieces. What the fuck? Kacchan hissed, and Izuku yelped as the back of his heel caught in an uneven crevasse in the ground. Their bodies tilted backwards, just barely missing the large piece of rubble flying over their heads. The air was forcefully stolen from Izuku's lungs as his back hit the ground, and Kacchan crashing on top of him. The blonde quickly rolled off, cursing loudly all the while. Jesus Christ, that fucker just doesn't give up, does he? He blared, throwing a heated glare toward the rock that just missed them by a few centimeters. Then, he turned it towards the dark cloud it escaped from. A dark chuckle reverberated through the broken streets and black dust as the towering silhouette of All Might could just be hinted at through the smoke, before it cut off to a muffled cough. Izuku stared intently into the darkness, opening his mouth. He can't have much more in him, he said, his eyes a wild green and gleaming with the words he kept repeating in his head. Can't give up, gotta win, got. Then why the fuck are we still standing here? Kacchan snarled, pulling him to his feet. We're almost there. If we lose now, I swear I'm gonna kill you. Izuku snorted, casting his eyes to Kacchan's sour expression. Yeah, that might work. They ran. His feet felt numb, yet every step shot sparks of pain through his legs. He was sure to get an earful from Recovery Girl later. He glimpsed behind him, and was met with the cold blue eyes of All Might bearing down on them. He didn't say anything. He just grabbed Kacchan by the black of his tank top, and feeling the electric rush of one for all pour through his arm, he threw. Kacchan made a strangled noise of surprise as he gravitated into the air, only a few more steps from the exit. All Might reached his arm out, large looming hand rapidly closing in on his green-haired student. Oh no, you fucking don't. Izuku could hear Kacchan shout in front of him, as he twisted his body midair. Duck, he did. The stench of burning hair invaded his nostrils, and beads of sweat broke out across his scalp like salty raindrops. Scorchingly hot air filled the space above him and he blinked his eyes, attempting to soothe the burning dryness. Then, he righted his back and continued to run, and he could feel the hovering presence of All Might disappearing behind him. His mind blank of everything but reaching the exit with Kacchan. He can do it, he can. Both he and Kacchan will make it out of here, no retries, no resets. No one left behind. A bloodied and blistered hand reached out to him. His brain had shut down long ago, and his body was running on autopilot. The edges of his vision were dotted with black, and all he could see was that hand. He'd forgotten who it belonged to, but it didn't matter. He took it. Kacchan pulled, and they both lost their balance and tumbled on top of each other. The blonde sputtered in indignation, but Izuku was too damn exhausted to do anything about it. His throat burned as he breathed, and he was inhaling so much air he thought his lungs might burst, with limbs like jelly. Kacchan pushed him off harshly and let him roll onto his back. Get off you twerp, he complained, but he was too winded to put any real bite behind it. Instead, he opted to join Izuku in the frantic attempts to catch his breath, which formed an almost companionable silence, aside from the heavy breathing that tainted it. The sound of gravel scraping against each other entered their ears, and All Might was looking down at them. A giant smile lit up his face, a complete dissonance with the rest of his marred and battered appearance. Congratulations, he boomed, smile stretching impossibly wider. Bright crimson reflected of his teeth and dripped slowly down the corner of his mouth, but he didn't even seem to notice. You both pass. 455 Chapter 26, Aftermath. And, oh my, is this another chapter already tilde? 3c. Izuku looked like a fish gaping for air, mouth open in disbelief. He knew what it meant once he crossed that finish line, but he never thought he would actually make it. Kachan's expression was neutral like stone, but his clenching fists betrayed the emotion he couldn't hide, spilling out of them like the tiny lines of crimson dripping from his palms to the tip of his fingers. You really surprised me with that falling building. All Might smiled, before his face suddenly took on a more serious tone. That being said, while your tactic might have worked on the basis of this being a simple exam, I'm sure you know as well as I that this could never be used in a real-life scenario. For that, not to mention your recklessness, I have to give you a few demerits. Kachan Tsked. Still, as you did follow the rules of the exam, you both pass. The hero's smile pulled taut over his cheeks, pearly whites gleaming like diamonds in the sun. His dark pit surveyed his two students, and with a bright expression of relief and pride, he proclaimed, "Wonderful teamwork, you two." As predicted, after Izuku and Kachan had been forcibly whisked away to the nurse's office, Recovery Girl dished out a biting lecture about understanding your own limits, and that recklessness will only get you killed. It was interesting to see someone else on the receiving end of her ire for once, Izuku thought, and the fuming blonde looked like he was about ready to implode. Kachan's hands were wrapped in layers of bandages, and swimming in a hefty amount of salves to ease the pain and speed up the healing process. Izuku's feet and legs found themselves in the same predicament, and he momentarily considered never moving again. Every little twitch of his torn muscles felt like someone firing a flamethrower aimed specifically at his nerve endings. Maybe I can find a job as a living statue, he thought, wincing. Not long after Recovery Girl finished her treatment, Aizawa walked through the door together with a sheepish All Might at his heels. Izuku raised an eyebrow at them, which Aizawa met with a dead-eyed stare. Kachan was wearing his usual expression of displeasure, and with a scowl at the teachers, he barked out an annoyed, "What?" Aizawa's eyes landed on searing red, and for a moment, he was just silent. Then, with a deep frustrated sigh, he spoke. "I watched the footage of your match," he eyed them coolly. "Your behavior was unacceptable." Now Aizawa, they did, All Might began, but cut himself off when he received a tired glare in response. "Don't try to make excuses, All Might. They need to hear this, and you know it as well as I do." All Might peered at his students, looking guilty, but ultimately sighed and nodded his head in acquiescence. "No, you're right, please excuse me, I got too caught up in the moment." Aizawa hummed, and his attention returned to the two teens frowning up at him from their hospital beds. The teacher's dark eyes zeroed in on Kachan, finding their first target as he shot off his lecture. Izuku observed silently, watching as crimson eyes began to twitch in frustration. "Bakugo, you attacked your teammate, unprovoked. And no, finding him annoying doesn't count as a provocation," he snapped, before Kachan could open his mouth. "I shouldn't have to tell you why this sort of behavior is unacceptable, especially for someone studying to be a hero, but you've proven me wrong." Kachan lowered his head, but continued to glare hotly at his teacher. Aizawa continued, "You're supposed to be fighting villains, not each other. What if your little spat caused you to fail? What if the villain escaped? What if your inability to control your own emotions caused someone's death?" With each word his eyes burrowed deeper into Kachan's. In a real battle, even the tiniest distraction could be the difference between life and death. You don't become a hero because you want to fight. You become a hero because you want to save lives. As the last words left Aizawa's mouth, Kachan's face drained of emotion, and he started blankly at his teacher's back as he turned to Izuku. The green-haired boy met the disapproving stare with eyes tired enough to challenge the infamous insomniac. "What did I do wrong this time?" he drawled out, and Aizawa narrowed his dark eyes on him. "Don't test me. While I understand defending yourself, know your boundaries. When you put your foot on Bakugo after you already knocked him down, was that in self-defense?" Izuku raised a corner of his mouth into a weary smile, and answered. "Yes. Do you think he would have just given up after I kicked him into the pavement?" He glanced to the boy in question, expecting a hail of red daggers thrown his way. But Kachan still had that same unreadable expression on his face, and Izuku frowned. He looked back at his teacher. Aizawa did not look amused. "Is that so?" he spoke slowly. "And in that moment, was that what you were thinking? Were you attempting to de-escalate the situation?" Izuku shrugged. "Kachan is hard to de-escalate. He's like a hand grenade, once the pin is pulled, it's too late to stop the explosion." He eyed his teacher consideringly. I gave him some advice. Advice? Aizawa repeated, raising an eyebrow inquisitively. And what sort of advice did you give him? Izuku looked at Kacchan again. Then, I told him that if he continues the way he does now, it's not gonna end well for him. He turned back to Aizawa. Or do you disagree, Aizawa-sensei? Aizawa didn't answer. Deku-kun, Midoriya-kun. He was still in the nurse's office when his friends ran up to him, worried looks on their faces. Uraraka threw a suspicious glare Kacchan's way, but he ignored her. She turned her attention back to Izuku. Conspiratorially, she leaned close and spoke in a hushed voice. What happened? Did he do something? Did he hurt you? She cracked her knuckles menacingly. If he did, just tell us, and we'll take care of the rest. Iida waved his hands, looking aghast. We won't be using violence. That's unbecoming of future heroes. He shouted, not addressing the fact that a large chunk of a hero's career consisted of violence. Still, they understood his intention, and didn't comment on it. Of course, I'm not saying that we'll let him get away with it. We just have to go through the proper channels, like professionals. Izuku didn't quite understand why, but a soft giggle burst through his lips, and he moved his hand up to cover it. His friends watched him, their serious expressions brightening at the sight of his eyes crinkling in amusement. Not wanting to lie, says the liar, to his friends, Izuku answered truthfully. Well, he did. Immediately, his classmates' faces turned sour, looking like they just stuffed a lemon in their cheeks. But before they could storm over to Kacchan and give him an earful, Izuku cut in. But it's all right. It doesn't bother me anymore. Uraraka looked at him, the start of angry tears pricking the corners of her eyes, and she clenched her fists. That doesn't make it all right. You don't have to force yourself to forgive someone just because you think that's what a hero does. Because it's not. Izuku's eyes hardened, but quickly softened when he saw her concerned expression. He sighed. That's not what I'm doing. He smiled at them, a genuine, though bittersweet, smile. Really, I'm fine. Actually, I'm glad what happened, did. I feel. His gaze turned to Kacchan. He had his back turned to them, laying in the hospital bed, head to the wall. Izuku rested his eyes on him a moment, before turning away. I feel like something important happened today, he settled. It was a rough start, but in the end, we managed to work together. We defeated All Might. It was fun. Uraraka and Iida met each other's stares, curious and concerned all at once, then looked at Kacchan. They shook their heads, and then they were gushing about how their own exams went. Mina, Kirishima, Kaminari and Shiro burst in just seconds later, fighting to be the first through the door and loudly talking over each other as they crowded around Kacchan, who barked at them to piss off. Izuku listened intently as Iida described his match against Power Loader, his wild gesticulating painting a very vivid image. Kacchan continued to be bombarded with questions, and despite all his complaining, he answered most of them, though somewhat dismissive. Eventually, Recovery Girl came in and told them to keep it down, and to not bother still recovering patients. Izuku's chest felt light, his muscles still ached painfully, but it was like fuzzy background noise now. For a moment, Izuku felt at peace. 455 Chapter 27, Intermission. And it's a short one this time. Next one is probably also gonna be pretty short as well, but don't worry, I think you'll like it. Smiley face. I already have the majority of it written, so it should hopefully come out soon. TBH, this chapter isn't super important. It's an intermission, for a reason. But I still wanted to include it. And hopefully, you'll still enjoy it. Dr. Kaiusai smiled at him as he sat down. How have you been doing since we last met? She asked, hands folded over her blue little notebook. Izuku mulled over the question for a while, considering his answer. Finally, it's been good. Kaiusai jotted something down. Did something special happen? She wondered, eyes raising to meet his. We had the end-of-term exam at UA, Izuku provided, and his therapist looked intrigued. It must have been pretty stressful. But judging from your response, you seem to have done well. She tilted her head slightly and tapped her pencil to her cheek. I'm curious, what does the end-of-term exam of the most prestigious hero school in Japan entail? Well, first there's the written exam, he began. It's pretty much what you'd expect. Lots of questions about quirk laws and the history of heroics, along with some more general subjects. Then there's the practical exam, he smiled at the memory. We were paired in individual teams to fight against one of our teachers, pretending to be a villain. That sounds pretty extreme, the doctor commented. I heard every teacher at UA is a pro hero. Did they at least take it easy on you? Well, I wouldn't say they went easy on us, the boy scratched the back of his skull. But they did provide us with alternative means to complete the exam, without having to beat them in a straight-up fight. Who was your opponent? All Might. Dr. Kyusai looked impressed. And you won? Izuku nodded. It wasn't easy, of course. Actually, I didn't think it was possible. Especially not when. He cut himself off suddenly, but the woman's keen eyes did not miss a beat, and her pupils narrowed. Was there a problem? She prompted, notebook up and ready. Izuku avoided her gaze, staring into a corner of the room. Dust had gathered between the crack where the wall strips met, and he studied it like a modern piece of art. Finally, still considering the small spots of dirt that stained the white varnish, he said simply, my teammate. Dr. Kyusai frowned. This person, you don't get along well. Izuku shook his head mutely, green curls softly whipping his cheeks. Then, tilting his chin up, he stared through the window, watching green trees swaying calmly back and forth in the wind. We did. The doctor put her book in her lap, concentrating on him. What changed? It's complicated, he answered vaguely. We used to be friends. But then, when everybody started to get their quirks except for me, I guess I wasn't important anymore. I just became a boring, useless Deku. You've known them for a long time, then. How did they feel about you entering UA? Izuku snorted. I'm lucky his quirk isn't killing people just by looking at them. The woman's eyebrows furrowed, and she grimaced mildly. Not good then. A soft laugh escaped the boy's chest, and Dr. Kyusai looked startled, before a pleased smile soothed her face. She retrieved her notebook and moved her pencil over the paper, while she continued her questioning. How was it, working together with him against All Might? He punched me. His therapist paused, eyes leaving her page to meet orbs of green. So I kicked his head into the pavement. She lowered her hands. Now I'm even more curious to know how you managed to pass the exam. Izuku leaned back in his seat, eyes fixed to the ceiling, staring at nothing. I guess I managed to talk some sense into him. Whatever I said, it was enough to convince Kachan to work with me. At least temporarily. He smiled placidly, and his eyes met Kyusai's. I'm not sure if anything between us has changed, but, he clenched his hands over one another and his head lowered subconsciously. I want to believe that it has. He wasn't sure when the tears started, or even why, until the doctor offered him a white tissue box with a sympathetic look on her face. He took it gratefully, quickly scrubbing the wet saline off of his cheeks. Kyusai laid her blue block on the table, and extended a slim hand toward him, a mellow expression on her face. Do you mind if I use my quirk on you? She asked. Usually, we have patients fill out blankets asking them how they're feeling, but I feel that this is much more accurate. Izuku inhaled a final sniffle and nodded, putting the tissues down on the table. Oh okay, he murmured, letting his hand fall in hers. Like the first time they met, she closed her eyes and let her quirk to its work. She didn't pull away hastily from him with a terrorized look in her eyes this time, but instead held him with a considering expression and eyebrows furrowed lightly in concentration. Eventually, she lets him go, and slowly opens her eyes. I'm glad you're feeling better, she says, and pick up her notebook. 455 Chapter 28, Someone Familiar. Kirishima, Mina, Kaminari and Sato had a look of doom weighing down their faces. Shiro chewed on his lip nervously, and they all watched Aizawa like he was the ferryman about to carry them to hell. Whoever failed the exam would be left in school, suffering through remedial classes while the rest joined together for a fun school trip to a forest lodge. Kaminari, Aizawa began, reading of his list of doomed names. Kirishima, he enunciated slowly, Mina, a rumbling bell tolled low afore each word, Sato, the final chime, and all fell silent, save from the judge himself. Shiro, you all failed the practical exam. And thus, he stared them down, and in that moment, he was neither man nor human. He was a monster. We're all going on the school trip. The man grinned in a way that said the only joy he found in life was to emotionally torment his students. Izuku sighed. This is how you create trust issues. The condemned five jumped from their seats, cheering and crying in equal measure. Their good spirits were quickly squashed however, when Aizawa revealed that the lodge wasn't just some nice vacation, but a boot camp to rigorously train and hone their abilities. And of course, everyone who failed will still be attending extra classes, the teacher spoke monotonously. Honestly, it probably would have been easier if you just stayed at school. Now take these pamphlets and pass. them on. There was an oppressive atmosphere in the air as 5 students stared longingly at the rest of their friends, so carefree, so innocent. Mina buried her face in her palms and Kaminari prayed silently to whichever deity would listen. Sato had produced a pack of cookies from somewhere, chewing them down like a starving man, while Kirishima risked his life by sharing his woes with Kachan. The blonde looked like he was about ready to commit murder when Hagakure suddenly jumped from her seat. "We should all go shopping together," she squealed, full of energy and impossibly animated for someone who was invincible. "We're going to need lots of supplies for the school trip, and there's a local mall not too far we could all go to." And just like that, whatever dark miasma had spread through the classroom dissipated like clouds parting to make way for the sun. Mina had stars in her eyes, Kaminari looked up from his seat like his prayers had been answered, and Iida was nodding approvingly. "A marvelous idea," he concurred. "It is always good to be prepared for any situation." Uraraka nudged Izuku lightly with an elbow. "Will you come with us, Deku-kun?" she inquired, a sunlit smile on her face and looking at him with the brightness of 1,000 stars. And honestly, Izuku would rather die than ruin that. "All right," he conceded. And when in an impossible feat her smile grew even brighter, he knew he made the right choice. Izuku didn't know how long he had been standing there, just staring in complete disbelief of what was before him. At first he thought he must be mistaken, because there was no way that what he was seeing was actually true. So, he stepped closer, to reassure himself that it was just some terribly dark hallucination. Staring into the eyes of his own reflection, emerald green painted in circles on the glass window, he looked at what was beyond. His eyes raked slowly over every little crevasse and detail, recreating a perfect imprint in his brain to make sure it was real. He blinked his eyes, and still, there it was. Plain as day and looking as innocent as could be. Except it wasn't. It must be a joke, surely, he thought. Because no one could be so stupid. So insensitive, so vile as to think that this was a good idea. That this was completely okay, and in no way fucked up whatsoever. But it was. He felt nauseous, a sickness that rotted him deep to the core. Izuku had seen a lot of things in his life, things he wished he could erase and scrub from his memory. Things no one should ever have to bear witness to. But this was different, in a way he couldn't properly describe. It wasn't the same gut reaction of terror as his own viscera spilled from his abdomen, or the despair of watching someone you thought would be with you for years to come crumble into dust. It couldn't be compared, but yet, this hurt in such a strange new way. He felt betrayed, but by what, he did not know. And try as he might, as much as he wanted to convince himself that this was some sort of sick joke, the chortling teens beside him reminded him that this was reality. That there were people out there who looked at Stain and did not immediately see a murderer, but someone to admire. It didn't matter if he killed people or not, because he did it, for a good cause. That he was cool. Don't misunderstand. It wasn't like Izuku was unable to wrap his head around why people may feel drawn to him. Stain had a hidden charisma that spoke to people sharing his same ideals. And there was nothing wrong with that. Heroes weren't perfect, on that, Izuku could agree. The system was corrupt, and there needed to be change. Hero did not mean good. But just because your goal is admirable does not mean that your path to reach it is justified. Izuku did not agree, and Izuku did not like him, but he understood Stain. But what he didn't understand, what absolutely baffled him, was why that somehow meant it way okay to create merchandise based off of a serial killer. His hands clenched to creaking fists, and unbidden, he could feel the power of one for all taking over him. He reached a hand out, and with shaky fingers, he touched the glass of the display window so softly, you might think it was an ancient artifact. His breathing came in shorter and shorter bursts, as the pads of his fingers pressed into the glass with ever-growing pressure to match. If he could just reach in, just break. You could just do it. Show them. Do it. Who's gonna to stop you? But no, that's wrong. It's not right. This isn't right. This fucking insult. Just imagine if Iida were here. Imagine how he would feel. Don't you want to help your friend? Don't you? This isn't helping. You should find who did this. Find them. Find them and. No, he screamed. He didn't care if people gave him odd looks and parents pulled their children closer. This isn't right. This isn't right. This isn't right. What's wrong with me? One for all seeped out of him like a popped balloon. Shame of a magnitude he'd never felt before filled him, and in the middle of that mall, standing before a killer's merchandise, he cried. What's wrong with me? I just want to go back to normal. Why can't I just stop being like this? You really are pathetic. Hey! An arm swung around his shoulders and pulled him in, and Izuku's muscles pulled tight at the sudden touch. Why are you crying? Something wrong. At first, he thought it must be one of his friends, and fear froze his stomach to ice. Please don't look, he thought. Don't look at me like this. I beg you. But when he glanced up to see the person holding him, he was taken aback by what he saw. Because it wasn't the reassuring smile of one of his friends, but a man he did not know. His face was covered in a wavy curtain of hair, constricted by the black hoodie that was pulled over his head, hiding his appearance. Izuku muttered, skin itching with discomfort at the stranger's touch. Why did he have to be so close? He understood someone being concerned by a teen crying alone in a mall, but hadn't this person ever heard of personal space? Oh, the weird man uttered suddenly, absolutely delighted. I recognize you. You're from UA, I saw you in that video. Midoriya Izuku, right, there was no question about which video he meant, and Izuku's discomfort grew. Even now, he would have the occasional stranger walk up to him and ask for a picture. This is gonna be so sick. They'd laugh, angling their cell phone. My friends are gonna be so jealous when I show them this. That's so cool, Izuku could hear the smile in the hooded man's voice. You're a real little hero, huh? He cackled, and leaned in closer until he was whispering in his ear. I'm so glad I got to meet you again. Chills slithered down Izuku's spine, the words freezing him in place. I hope you remember me. I'd be kinda hurt if you didn't. Once more, Izuku looked up at that hair-covered face. Shigaraki leaned back, slowly unveiling the hideous grin that tore his face apart from ear to ear. Rows of unkempt teeth were covered by lips so dry, they looked like they were ready to snap. The cracks and crevices littering the sickly skin bled red, and carved even deeper into his mouth as it moved to form words. Let's take a walk. 455 Chapter 29, Gamble and Guidance. Well, the only excuse I have for this delay is that I was too busy playing Fallout New Vegas to write on the story, oops. Not my fault, the game is so damn fun. Let's take a walk. The first thought that passed through Izuku's mind was, let's not, but what left his mouth instead was a simple, why? Instantly, 4 of Shigaraki's fingers wrapped around his throat, with the middle one hovering just a twitch away. And despite the somewhat inconvenient grip, Shigaraki was still able to muster enough strength to dig the digits into the soft skin hard enough to bruise. Do you remember my quirk? He asked, and Izuku could feel the man smirk into his hair. Once this last finger touch you, you'll be nothing but dust. So I suggest you consider your next actions very, very closely. And oh, Izuku remembered, more than Shigaraki could know, and with memories clear as glass, he remembered. He remembered how his skin turned dry with decay, flaking off his muscles and floating away in tiny fragments, not unlike a snake crawling out of its old husk. Except unlike a snake, there wasn't a new shiny layer of skin waiting beneath, but flesh and blood and screaming pain. And he remembered the look on Asui's face before her head faded into nothing but ash, mixing together with the blood spurting out of her neck, turning it into a dull crimson sludge. He remembered, but what he couldn't remember, was the fear. He knew of its existence, but it was like words stuck to the tip of your tongue. He knew, but no matter how far he reached and scrambled, he couldn't find that lost feeling of terror that drowned him like an icy sea, pulling him deeper into its depths until all he had was darkness. Now, he was only left with anger, which swelled inside of him and embraced his soul like an old friend. Izuku smiled, warm as the sun, and opened his arms wide. A quiet whisper left his lips, and he mouthed the words. Welcome home. I wonder how many I can take with me after I'm done with you before the police shows up, Shigaraki mused with glee, the last finger floating dangerously close by his hostage's neck. 10, 12, what do you think? I think you should get to the point. Izuku pressed his lips into a thin line as he attempted to glare at the villain behind him. Unbeknownst to the criminal, however, the threatening words actually filled Izuku with a sense of relief. He'd be the first to die. Izuku would be back before Shigaraki hurt anyone else. Even so, while the boy wasn't worried about the people around them like the villain wanted him to, he kept still. Because through his anger was another feeling, a feeling much more powerful than his urge to rip himself free and take Shigaraki down once and for all. And it was the one feeling that killed more humans than any war ever could, curiosity. Izuku found himself in a situation with an opportunity too good to pass up, and he did not want it to end so soon. Because what did Shigaraki want? It was a question too tantalizing to go unanswered. So, with a sharp nod and in an even tone, he said, all right. I'll come with you. Izuku tried not to squirm as he waited for Shigaraki to speak. The bench under him felt too hard, and his legs were starting to go numb. He eyed the people passing them by to distract himself, listening to their shouts and laughs while they wandered around without a care in the world, completely unaware of the danger lurking in the middle of them. Izuku wondered how long that would last. When the villain decided that his victim looked uncomfortable enough, he let out a quiet chuckle and in a deep voice finally spoke. You know, there's a lot of things I hate in this egotistical world, but there's something that's been bothering me especially lately. Maybe you could solve it for me. Izuku sat silent, feeling 4 deadly fingers resting considering against his throat. Have you read the news lately? I have. It's funny, you know, even after I let all those Numas run wild, it didn't even make the front page. Everyone's too busy talking about Stain, it's like they forgot. He seems to be the only thing people care about nowadays. Shigaraki's voice was turning increasingly aggressive, and Izuku's found it increasingly hard to breathe as the scarred man subconsciously tightened his grip around the student's throat. Stain. What's so special about him anyways? Why do everyone like him so much? What's the difference between him and me? Even if he wanted to, Izuku was unable to get a word past his lips. He gasped around the hand slowly robbing him of consciousness as white spots began to dance in the corners of his vision. His body begged for him to act, but his curiosity sat like a devil on his shoulder, whispering soothing assurances in his ears. Not yet, it said, urging him to endure. We still don't know what he wants. We have to wait, we have to know. He's not going to kill us yet. Just after that though, perhaps noticing his distress, Shigaraki eased his grip enough to allow Izuku a gulp of much-needed fresh air. We're doing the same shit, aren't we? He muttered, bitter. We're just destroying what we don't like. Izuku glanced up at the villain, observing molten red eyes that burned with the glint of insanity. Mulling over his words carefully, he attempted to find the best combination so that he could communicate with the volatile man without setting him off. I thought Stain was one of you, he started, and Shigaraki's eye twitched in annoyance. Green eyes cast a quick look to the roaring crowd, then back to the man. With a twist of his lips, he pressed on, guess not. I don't like him either. He tried to kill my friend. Shigaraki scoffed irritatedly, ignoring the boy's slip-up. I wasn't talking about you, he said, mouth pulling down into an open frown that displayed his gritted teeth. Besides, you made bigger news than I did. So annoying. The sound of nails dragging across skin made Izuku's hair stand on end as Shigaraki scratched his neck in frustration. Cracked nails gouged into old scars, working to add to the canvas of puckered lines already there, some still a raw pink in their freshness. Breaths through his nose, a whistling sound as they passed. The chatter of the crowd forced to drown the noises out. Insects crawled under the skin, moving through his body and to his throat. Fingers flexed unwittingly, the magnetic force pulling them in. Scratch, itching, stinging, hurting. He wanted to scratch. I don't like him, Izuku repeated, forcing words through his throat, tingling like acid. But I understand his motivations. That's the difference. When people understand you, they can find something to sympathize with. Even if you don't like them, you can still agree with their words, and that's, the boy twisted his neck, glaring up at Shigaraki unwaveringly. That's why it's Stain's face on all the posters, why you can buy your own replica of his mask or decorate your shelf with his action figure, instead of you. People don't like you, and they don't understand you either. Crimson eyes bore into him, delving places deep and dangerous, but Izuku refused to break silence. The people around them melted away and forgotten. Then, ever so slowly, the man started to laugh. Dark chuckles reverberated through Izuku's skull and jostled his brain, and they soon turned into cackles of delight as Shigaraki stared down at him. I see. I think I get it now, Shigaraki smiled, his mouth filled with too many teeth to look natural. I really can't stand you, Midoriya Izuku, but, you're right, aren't you? Izuku shook in place as the man holding him trembled against his back with a chest full of laughter. And when Shigaraki's mirth turned into a sound of genuine amusement, he wasn't sure whether he should feel disturbed or not. Then, abruptly, the laughter stopped, only leaving behind a small buzz that slowly gained volume as the endless noise of the busy mall faded back into existence. So what I need is an ideal, huh? Just like the hero killer, Shigaraki mused, eyes alight with what Izuku could only describe as wonder. My ideal, he breathed, his expression morphing gradually until it settled on one of realization. I do have one. And then he smiled, wide enough to split his face in two. But despite the unsettling nature of it, this was probably the most relaxed Shigaraki had ever looked. Someone only giving him a passing glance might not even think twice about it, just turning away to go on about their day. Because this wasn't a face of malice, or a grin of pleasure as Shigaraki basked in the pain of others. No, this was some way, somehow, something that could actually be considered happiness. Then, gone just as quickly as the laughter, the smile turned into bitterness as the villain let out a weary sigh. His eyes turned dark, and with a snarl, spat through his teeth, "It all comes back to All Might, doesn't it? Everything. It's all about All Might. Izuku opened his mouth, maybe to object. I want to be a hero. Large emerald eyes sparkled with the dreams of youth. I want to save people with a smile. Just like All Might. And closed it. They spent a moment in thoughtful silence, the hand on his neck almost forgotten. I guess it is, he acquiesced, finally. Then, rolling the dice for the gamble, he queried, so? What are you trying to achieve? Shigaraki glanced down at him, a scrutinizing look in his eyes. The little hero's curious, huh? He grinned. Maybe I'll just keep it my little secret for now. Still, this has been a very fruitful conversation, Midoriya Izuku. I'm glad I found you here. Izuku looked away and mumbled under his breath, "You're welcome." The fingers around his neck twitched. There's something else that's been bothering me though, Shigaraki said suddenly. In an instant, spindly digits buried themselves into Izuku's dark curls and his neck made a snapping noise as Shigaraki wrenched his head back forcefully. He hissed in pain and closed his eyes momentarily, and when he opened them again, all he saw was glaring red. Are you even scared? Izuku didn't answer. He wasn't sure he could. His mind was blank as the all-consuming ruby sea surrounded him, and all he could do was to stare back. Eyes wide open, unblinking and glowing with unspoken emotion, his throat growing ever tighter as his breaths turned shallow, and then... Deku-kun. The pair froze as the name was uttered, scared and uncertain. Together, they turned their heads to see the round face of a girl, chocolate eyes observing them with confusion and fear. Her arms fidgeted in an attempt to find their right use, and Izuku realized he was out of time. He didn't even need to think. Effortlessly, his hand snapped up and gripped Shigaraki's wrist in a crushing hold. Surprised, the villain attempted to complete the circle around the boy's neck, but with a yank, Izuku tore himself free and pushed his head as far away from the man as it could go. It ripped out several strands of his hair in the process, which still clung to Shigaraki's fingers and fluttered through the air innocently, but it was a small price to pay for freedom. With the slim arm still in his grasp, Izuku stopped taking risks. He flicked his wrist, bent backwards and... Snap. Shigaraki howled through his teeth, pulling the injured hand to his chest and cradling it protectively. He stumbled from his seat, and with a furious expression twisting his face, lunged forward with the one still functioning arm aimed at Izuku. Never losing focus, the teen dodged into a crouch. Snapped a leg out, he swept it into the villain's ankles and sent him careening off to the side. His head thunked against the floor, and his black hood splayed out behind him as he rolled onto his back, groaning. Izuku walked up beside him, purposeful steps leading his way. He raised a foot, aimed his red sneaker, and stomped. A loud crack resonated in his ears as he broke his former captor's intact wrist, and he finally let himself exhale a quick breath of relief. He bent down to place his hand on the man's shoulder, flipping him onto his stomach unceremoniously. Taking a not-too-kind hold of the broken appendages, he navigated them until they were resting threateningly over Shigaraki's neck. Uraraka, he spoke coolly. Deku, what's going on? Izuku didn't look at her, too focused on the threat under him to bother. Even if the villain was currently incapacitated, he wasn't going to take any chances. I'd rather not go through this again. Call the police, he said, and after some thought, added, and get a hero over here as well if you can. Uraraka flickered her eyes between her friend and the stranger beneath him, currently pressed flush against the floor and trashing his legs while swearing loudly. She turned back to Izuku and nodded. All right. Izuku listened numbly to the tap-tap-taps of Uraraka's phone as he continued to stare Shigaraki down, before the noise was drowned out by the growing crowd. I wonder if it's illegal to use someone else's quirk, the boy mused curiously, observing Shigaraki's twitching hands. Hello, I need a police officer. 455 Chapter 30, for a moment. Hi. Sorry. Yeah, apparently I'm not quite dead yet. Just almost. A lot happened. Some really shitty shit. Some good stuff. Got a job, lost a job. No, I didn't get fired, it was a 1-year contract, hop made some money, sweet sweet cash. Anyways, I don't really have an excuse for this long absence other than I lost motivation to write on this. I'm honestly surprised I got as far as I did. I suck at finishing projects. Great at coming up with new ideas, but I lose motivation 10 minutes in and forget about it. Mostly. But I had this story in the back of my mind time and again and I always felt sad that I never updated. So here's an update. I actually finished this chapter a long ass time ago but never got to edit it, but I somehow managed to pull together enough motivation to do it. That being said, before I publish a chapter I always read through it once before posting, to catch any mistakes. I haven't done that this time. I don't have the energy, but hopefully it is still okay. I have some more future stuff written for this story, so hopefully I will get some more chapters out, but I don't wanna get your hopes up too much. Sorry. But hey, a chapter. Yay. Now, if I do manage to continue, I will tell you that we are getting closer to Izuku revealing his powers. Just thought you'd like to know. Anyways, I'll stop rambling now and on to the story. Izuku was lost in a different world, a world made by two, a villain and the designated hero. He wasn't brought back to reality until a hero and a few police officers arrived on the scene to take the captured criminal away. Shigaraki hissed as his broken hands were cuffed behind his back, and his eyes seared as he stared at Izuku with pure hate. The boy stared back, face blank. One of the police officers smiled at Izuku, seemingly impressed as he thanked him for catching such a high-profile villain. His partner glared at the other officer, before scolding the freckled teen for his recklessness. Izuku wasn't surprised by the response, but seriously, what was he supposed to do? Stay still, and hope Shigaraki would let him live? Probably. He was questioned several times if he needed any medical assistance, but Izuku declined them each time. I'm fine, but my throat will probably have a few bruises tomorrow. He nodded toward Shigaraki, who had finally ceased struggling as he was escorted away. The man stood hunched over, head bowed, long pale hair concealing whatever expression his face currently held. He probably needs it more than I do. The cuffed villain raised his head slightly. A sharp red glow peeked through ragged strands, holding a silent promise for the future. But Shigaraki didn't need words for his message to ring loud and clear. I'm going to kill you. His eyes stung Izuku's soul like a sharp cut of the knife. I don't care what I have to do. I'm going to kill you. Curious crowds of people were shooed to the side as 3 people were escorted out of the mall. Uraraka had been asked to come along as a witness, and she had made it her mission to stand like a shield between Shigaraki and her friend. She watched the black hooded figure like a hawk, her usual soft eyes dark and calculating and with a dangerous frown on her face. Like the villain could get free at any moment. Shigaraki looked back, observing the 2 students as they were ushered into a waiting police car. The hooded man was still surrounded by police officers and a vigilant hero, standing as if waiting for something. Izuku peered on curiously until the serious-looking policewoman closest to him answered the silent question. They want better security before they leave, she provided, nodding toward the group. Another hero has been called in, along with something more sturdy than this to transport the villain in. She slapped the roof of the police car for emphasis. Izuku nodded with understanding, and the woman pushed his door shut so they could leave. Before it swung closed completely, the boy took a last glance at Shigaraki. His mouth moved, cracked lips forming just a single word. Midoriya. Click, and the door sealed. Izuku could hear his own breath in his ears. The air around him felt oppressing, cold and careless, turning his skin into goosebumps. He shivered, staring through the black window at darkened gray and a dot muted red, which stood out against everything else. A color screaming for attention, an universal sign of caution. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. He curled his fingers into clenched fists, pushing them down into his lap. Be still, he told his body, but the name echoed in his head. Midoriya. The way Shigaraki looked at him, the crimson of his eyes flickering wildly, but never losing their focus on him. Midoriya, are you really all right? Uraraka asked, and Izuku took a heavy breath at the sound of her voice. He turned his head. The girl fidgeted uncomfortably in the seat next to him, displaying her nervosity. It's not like I don't trust you, but I know you don't like to rely on others, so, she trailed off, eyes drifting to the side. Izuku's face softened, but a light tremble still stayed in his limbs uninvited. Uraraka, I'm okay, really, he said and gave her a small smile. The air of apprehension around her faded as she answered him with a short nod, and returned his expression. Eventually, they arrived at the police station, and the car pulled up into the parking lot just outside. They unbuckled their belts, and it wasn't long before Izuku found himself face to face with the lead investigator of the League of Villains, Tsukauchi Naomasa. Now, please start from the beginning and tell me in detail what happened. He began the interrogation, holding a notebook in one hand and a pen in the other. A sound recorder sat on the table, the blinking red light on it indicating that it was working. It kind of reminded Izuku of his therapy sessions with Dr. Kyusai, except unlike those, what he said here wouldn't stay between just the two of them. Some of my classmates and I went to the mall together to buy supplies for our upcoming school field trip. When I was alone, Shigaraki came up behind me and took me hostage and asked me some questions. Do you know why he was there? Tsukauchi cut in, pupils sharp and serious as he leaned closer. He looks right in his element, Izuku thought. No, he shook his head before expanding. I don't know if he planned the whole thing or if it was just some crazy coincidence. The policeman hummed, a mix of concern and thoughtful on his face. It could mean a huge breach to UA's security if this attack was planned. Either way, we shouldn't take any chances. What did you two talk about? Well, the freckled student thought back to their conversation. The moment Shigaraki spoke, his name was still clear, playing perfectly like a movie in the back of his skull. Midoriya. He wondered if there was a sequel. He asked me about Stain, Izuku answered, and Tsukauchi nodded in encouragement for him to continue. He wanted to know what made them different. The way he spoke about him makes me think Stain was never a member of the League. The detective sat back a bit, but he didn't look too surprised. It makes sense. I've seen people online discussing the theory that Stain worked independently from the League, and it lines up with what we know about the man. Stain was the lone wolf type, and his ideals don't seem to line up with whatever Shigaraki's are. Shigaraki hates him, the young hero returned. I think he's jealous that Stain got more attention than he did. So Shigaraki wanted to understand why. Exactly, Izuku confirmed with a nod. I told him that the difference was that, unlike him, people know what Stain's ideals are. Whether you hate him or not, he has an understandable goal that a lot of people agree with: eradicate the so-called false heroes, and reclaim the title for those deemed worthy. Tsukauchi was still transcribing his words to paper as he asked, and how did he respond? The boy stared up into the ceiling. He laughed. The detective let his pen hover over the paper as he paused. He laughed. I think he came to some sort of realization, Izuku explained. A goal, some sort of motivation, his ideology. I'm not sure what exactly. He didn't answer me when I asked, so you'll have to try questioning him yourself. Tsukauchi scribbled down a note. Did he mention anything else? The student shook his head. No, he trailed off, thinking back to his encounter with the criminal. He squinted as a memory nipped at him and, with some hesitation, he said, actually, there was one other thing. All Might. He said everything always comes back to All Might. His interrogator slowly placed his chin in his palm, humming aloud and seemingly in deep thought. The reason Shigaraki came to the USJ was to kill All Might. Their Numu was created for that sole purpose. It's clear he has some sort of grudge against the number one hero. Whether that is simply because of his position as the symbol of peace or something more personal, it's hard to say. Guess you'll just have to ask him then, Izuku shrugged. Villains like to talk. The detective smiled. True enough, he agreed, straightening his back into proper sitting position. He glanced at something in his notebook. And when did Uraraka arrive? Just after I asked Shigaraki about his goal, the teen informed. That's when I apprehended him. Ah, yes, about that. The policeman shifted his eyes to the side uncomfortably, before turning them back to Izuku's and attempting a reassuring smile. That looked more guilty than anything. Izuku rolled his eyes and cut in before the man could start. I didn't use my quirk, he said, fighting to keep his voice professional. He had to bite his cheek and take a calming breath to manage, allowing the pain to keep him in check. Tsukauchi doesn't make the rules, he reminded himself, exhaling slowly. He just enforces them. With a deadpan expression he continued. I don't need one for all to break someone's bones. Tsukauchi gave him a long look before he pinched the bridge of his nose with a deep suffering sigh. No, I suppose you don't, he shook his head. Anyways, I'm happy to be saved the headache of writing out a report of illegal quirk use. Not to mention, I would rather not have to punish the one who caught one of Japan's most wanted criminals. Izuku grimaced in response. I still think that's a stupid law. The detective wore a perfect poker face before his eyes shifted to the ceiling, frowning. The law isn't always perfect, he said. But it's still the law we have to follow. Izuku wasn't impressed. He scoffed. Someone should change it then. When Tsukauchi finally finished his interrogation, 3 hesitant knocks sounded at the door. The officer opened it to reveal a nervous-looking All Might in his true form standing in the doorway. The dark-haired man gave his friend a reassuring smile. He's clear to go, Tsukauchi affirmed. The hero smiled and glanced over the broader man's shoulder to see his green-haired student quietly observing them. So he's not in any trouble, is he? He implored. Tsukauchi motioned his head in confirmation and All Might breathed a sigh of relief. Then, with a nod towards the still-seated teen, he inquired, "Could I borrow your room for a moment? I'd like to talk to him in private." The policeman gave a sweep of his hand to motion his friend inside. "No problem. Take all the time you need." All Might smiled gratefully at his friend before stepping inside the room and wrangled his large body awkwardly into the chair Tsukauchi just vacated. The detective left the two alone, closing the door behind him with a soft click. The blonde hero stared at the shut exit for a moment. He scratched the back of his neck and shifted his attention to his student. Calculating green bore into nervous blue, eyebrows quirked upwards curiously as Izuku waited for the hero to speak. "My boy," he began. The voice wavered slightly and All Might cleared his throat before continuing. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere but here right now, but he continued on valiantly despite the suffocating tension. "I want to start by saying what you did today was very brave." That being said, Izuku's eyes narrowed. I mean, don't misunderstand. I am very proud of you, I am. But I'm also worried. Everything may have turned out fine this time, but if you have made even a small mistake, I wouldn't." All Might exhaled, looking at him in bewildered exasperation. "You don't know." "I do know." Izuku's face was stone. "There's no point in worrying about me. This was the only outcome. I'm not going to apologize for it, so drop the lecture." His teacher looked taken aback by his brazen attitude. Izuku couldn't help feeling guilty at the hurt in his mentor's eyes, even if the hero buried it quickly with a harsh frown and pale-knuckled fists. "Have you been meeting with Dr. Kaiusai?" Izuku's eyes widened for a moment. Then he snapped, "How do you know her?" All Might knew that Izuku was seeing a therapist, but he was positive he had never told the hero the name of said therapist. Did his mother tell him? The man looked sheepish, avoiding the sharp glare digging into his skin. He coughed into a fist, stalling for time as he tried to think of the right words. "Well, as your teacher, I've been concerned about your recent behavior and shift in personality." He was sweating bullets by now. It's not like I know anything about what you two talk about during your sessions. That would be very illegal, not to mention a huge breach of privacy." For every stutter, Izuku felt himself growing less and less impressed by the rambling words that left his mentor's mouth. The whole point of telling All Might about his sessions was so he would stop worrying, yet here they are. Stalking his therapist. Really? All Might. The name was spoken softly, yet it was enough to shut the blonde up as he stared at Izuku with silent panic. It was almost funny, watching the number one hero acting like a child who just got caught stealing the last cookie out of the cookie jar. Izuku was not amused. "Look," All Might sighed, taking in the angry green of his student's glare in defeat. "I know it was wrong of me, but I wanted to make sure she would be good for you. There's a lot of people out there who don't take work seriously, even when that work is to help other people. If she was one of those people, she could do you more harm than good. So you decided to run a background check on her." All Might breathed out through his nose slowly, looking at the floor. He nodded. "Yes, I did." He looked guilty, but not as guilty as Izuku thought he should. "I understand that you're angry. Even if I had only your best interest in mind, I shouldn't have gone behind your back like that. Especially as your teacher. It was very unprofessional of me." Izuku rubbed the back of his skull. He could hear a muted thud-thud-thud that gaining volume in his ears, signaling the incoming headache grate. He didn't know if he was mad. He knew he should be, but it was kind of hard when All Might looked at him with such genuine concern it hurt. Still, that the teacher never even bothered to ask him first left a sour taste in his mouth. He hated the feeling of his privacy being breached, and he doubted Drive Kaiusai would appreciate it either. He wondered if he should tell her, next time. She deserved to know, didn't she? He would ask the hero how he found out her name in the first place, but as he considered it the answer became increasingly obvious. He was the number one hero. He must have more powerful connections than he knew what to do with. Like Tsukauchi, pull enough strings and All Might could probably tell Izuku what he had for breakfast. Or get his patient records. No, he wouldn't do that to you. That's just too cruel. You know he just wants to help you. But what if he thought he was helping? Midoriya, Izuku snapped out of the thoughts tumbling around his head, which were doing nothing to ease his growing headache. He refocused his attention back to All Might, who looked at him, eyebrows creased in worry. Izuku frowned. I really wish he'd stop looking so concerned all the time. Again, I am very sorry. I hope you can forgive me. Izuku shook his head back and forth for a moment, trying to clear it. His aching brain protested at the movement, causing him to wince in pain. He cursed his stupidity, before delicately unfurling the fists he didn't even know he had formed. It's fine, he said. I'm not angry. And it was true, he realized. He wasn't angry. He was scared. His teacher looked relieved. His concern hadn't evaporated completely, but he seemed content for now. Ah, I'm glad, he nodded, smiling thinly. Then, oh, and if you'd like to know, I didn't find anything incriminating about your doctor. She has almost exclusively positive references. Izuku gave him a look, and All Might at least had the decency to look ashamed. That being said, I definitely won't do something like this again. Well, not without asking, at least. Izuku tried to decide between glaring at the hero or laughing. He compromised with a deep suffering sigh. Izuku. Midoriya Inko ran up to her son and dragged him into a bone-crushing hug. The woman could be surprisingly strong when she wanted to, Izuku noted in pain. Big fat tears soaked his shoulder as the woman cried into it. My poor heart can't take it. She wailed, bringing him impossibly closer. Really strong, ouch. When the policeman called and told me it was about you, I thought for sure it was going to stop. I'm so glad you're fine. Her worried sobs was enough to break down the walls around Izuku's heart that he had so carefully crafted the last few resets, at least temporarily. He circled his arms around her cautiously, returning her hug and ignoring the way his ribs creaked in protest. He didn't have the heart to tell her to ease up, not when she held onto him like she would lose him forever once she let go. Eventually, after her shaking and sobs had calmed somewhat, she began to relax and Izuku's torso cried in sweet relief. She retrieved her head from his shoulder to stare up at him, emerald green still shining with unshed tears and red around the edges. Don't ever worry me like that again. She hiccuped, lips trembling. If something were to happen to you, if you, she cut herself off with a sob, pushing her face back into his shirt and tugging at the fabric desperately. I don't know what I would do without you. Shish, Izuku whispered, bringing a scarred hand up to card through her dark green locks. Don't worry about that. You won't ever have to worry about me leaving you. He blinked to clear up his blurred vision and was surprised at the salty beads that rolled down his cheeks. He wiped them off lazily. Come to think of it, I haven't been crying as much as I used to. How can I not? Inko shook her head, sniffling loudly. I will always worry about you. That's what it means to be a parent. She tilted her head to look at him. But, her voice shook, but her expression slowly bloomed into a tentative smile. The corners of her mouth wobbled with strain, but it was warm, and it was genuine. Izuku felt his heart clench, but for once it wasn't in pain. I heard what you did. You were really cool, Izuku. He crumbled. His mother's embrace was so warm, so strong. Safe. He could allow himself to break just this once because he knew that as soon as his cries had ended, as soon as his tears dried, she would be there. She would put the pieces back together, and Izuku could be strong again. For a moment, he allowed himself weakness. For a moment, he didn't want to care. So that's it for today. Goodbye.